Okay guys, today I want to try making a different kind of video. Today I want to go over how to properly prepare for your software engineering interviews. So to properly prepare for your software engineering interviews, I have 3 tips. My first tip is to do your homework. And I know that sounds ridiculous. I know it sounds so simple, but I think it's something that's constantly overlooked. I think it's something that I definitely made the mistake of when I was first preparing for interviews. And I think it's really the best thing to do when you first start trying to get a job. And really what I mean by this is kind of as like a subtask of this first point is to know the process of the company that you're interviewing with. So if I'm going to go interview with Google, I should know their process start to finish. I should know that I'm going to have a call with a recruiter. I should know that I'm then going to have a phone screen. I should know that I'm then going to probably go on site and have a full day of interviews. So that's the first part of this task, is to know just what the process is going to look like, what you should expect, and kind of just know what you should be expecting, right? Like what you signed up for. I think the second part of this task is really to just understand the kinds of questions that this company asks. There's tons of resources online. There's tons of different things that you could read between blog articles, between actual books like Cracking the Coding Interview, or just between different websites like HackerRank or LeetCode. There's a lot of different resources out there to actually figure out the kinds of questions or even the exact questions that the company you're interviewing with asks. So definitely make sure that you guys do your research in terms of the questions that they like to ask and how often they have been asked. I think this is probably the most important point. So just to kind of like reiterate the importance of this is definitely my biggest mistake when I first started going out and looking for jobs. I was super dedicated, I worked super hard, but the problem was I wasn't really preparing correctly. And so like I would spend tons of times doing problems. So I'd spend like a lot of time doing problems, but the problem was I wasn't really focusing on the right things. I was focusing more on like general concepts. I was thinking about like, I don't know, like a shortest path algorithm. I was thinking about how to implement BFS or something like merge sort. And so the reason why that's not really, they're good to know, they're good concepts to know and to understand, but something like implement merge sort as an interview question isn't generally something that you'll see. So I really didn't prepare correctly in that respect. I wasn't really preparing correctly in terms of like what I might see on my interview. I was more preparing generally for just random knowledge I needed to know about computer science. So if I could have taken the time that I spent and actually applied it to something that was more useful, like the kinds of questions that the company asks or the general process of the company, I probably would have had better results. So again, do your homework. That is my first tip. Now, my second tip, again, sounds really generic, sounds really obvious, but it's simply to practice. And I think it's super, super important how you determine how you practice and when. And so a lot of people kind of just go into practicing for these interviews. I feel like they kind of just go in and practice whenever they have time and they do whatever problems they have available. But I really think you should be methodical with how you practice. So the first thing that I would do when you're practicing is set up a schedule or have some sort of goals, right? Have a way to measure how successful you are when you practice. The first thing is just be diligent when you practice, right? Have a schedule, set a goal, right? I want to accomplish 5 problems. I want to solve 5 problems every single day. Or I want to spend 2 hours studying every single day on this website or doing this kind of problem. You need some sort of metrics to be able to measure how you are performing. What I did when I studied was I typically tried to set a goal of, I think it was 5 problems a day. I tried to do 5 different problems a day. If I was studying for a particular company, I would try and do 5 Google questions or 5 Facebook questions a day. The next thing when you practice, and this is super, super tempting, especially when you're doing something like LeetCode, but do not look at the solutions. And I mean this, because this is how you learn. You want to practice like it's the real environment. So what I would do when I practice is I would set a timer for maybe 30 minutes. I would read the prompt, I wouldn't do anything else, I'd put my phone away, I wouldn't be listening to music, I would be in my room alone as if it was just me and the interviewer, and I would truly try and solve the question as if I had never seen it, and I would just do whatever I can. So if 30 minutes had gone by and I didn't understand the problem, okay, I didn't do well in the interview, right? I probably didn't get the job. If I was able to solve in 30 minutes, I would think about ways to optimize it, I would talk through almost like what I was thinking, and really make sure that I could treat it like it was a real interview. So don't look at the solutions. I think the biggest way that I learned was just by forcing myself to try and come up with a solution, even if I seemed like I had no way of solving the problem. So don't look at the solutions, learn by thinking. My third little point for practicing is just prepare properly, right? So by failing to prepare, you're actually preparing to fail. So set yourself up for success. Make sure that you practice, have a schedule, have a goal, figure out a way, whatever works for you, but just make sure that when you're practicing and you're moving towards your goal, okay? If it's to get that job or to get that on-site interview, right? Maybe you're at a phone screen level. Make sure that you're practicing in a way that's moving you towards successfully attaining your goal. And ideally it should be metric-based, right? So I've done 5 problems, I've studied 2 hours, anything like that. My third and final tip is really just use good resources. So again, this kind of goes back to my first part when I was talking about I didn't really understand how to prepare. I wasn't using good resources. I was either looking at random books or blog articles. I really wish someone told me about LeetCode. I don't think it was until the very end of my senior year that someone mentioned it to me just in passing, and I kind of looked into it and I looked up, you know, what it was about, and I kind of like did a couple problems and I failed. I failed at a lot of them, but definitely learn to use good resources. So for me, I would definitely suggest LeetCode as the best resource. I've done things like HackerRank, I've read a lot of books. I really think that the way I learned the most and was the most successful in terms of studying for my interviews was definitely by using LeetCode as my #1 resource. So I think there's also like a premium subscription you can buy. I think it's like a few, $5-10 or something a month. I definitely recommend it. I think it's super useful. It allows you to see how often questions are asked by certain companies, as well as just long lists of questions that companies ask, like whether it's Amazon, Facebook, Google, Twitter, any of them. They organize it by frequency and by whatever company asks those questions. Another good resource that I found particularly useful, but it wasn't as good as LeetCode, is Cracking the Coding Interview, which is I think what kind of like everyone goes by now. I feel like everyone knows about Cracking the Coding Interview, and I feel like it's almost like raised the bar in terms of what you should know, because now that's kind of like the bare minimum. So Cracking the Coding Interview was a book that I read that I thought was helpful, but again, not as useful as LeetCode. And then another book that I actually recently discovered from one of my subscribers, he told me about it. I think David told me about it actually. It's called Elements of Programming Interviews. And so it's super useful. This is kind of like a deeper dive, I think, than Cracking the Coding Interview. So I thought that it was definitely more thorough. I definitely thought it had more problems, probably like harder problems as well. So I thought, you know, Cracking the Coding Interview, scratching the surface, and then the Elements of Programming Interviews just going a little bit deeper. So that's another resource that I would recommend. I would probably recommend that over Cracking the Coding Interview, but regardless, I still think LeetCode just is really just the best way. And then third, I actually have a repository for interviews on GitHub. So if you guys are interested in that, you guys can check that out. And so that was sort of, again, just something I did to track my studying. It was something I did to help other people as well. But if you guys want, you guys can check out the repository. I like to think that my YouTube channel is also a good resource. You guys have seen all my other content. It's literally just LeetCode questions, trying to explain how solutions work, why they work, how quickly, you know, how efficient the runtimes are. And finally, I actually just recently made a Discord channel, and the whole point of this channel is just everyone hopefully will join, and we can all discuss and all share information amongst ourselves in terms of who has what interviews, what to expect on the Google Onsite next week, what kinds of questions you got asked when you were at Facebook last week. You guys can ask to find mock interview partners. You guys can request questions for LeetCode, all that kind of stuff. So my third tip is to use good resources. And those are the resources that I used. Okay guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Again, this was just 3 tips that I think are really important for crushing your software engineering interviews, whether it's on-site or phone screen. If you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments. I would love to also hear your opinions in terms of whether this was helpful or not, whether you guys like this kind of video. If you guys do want to see more videos like this, please let me know. I'd be happy to make more. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys next time.